Hi. God gets a lot of blame. He gets a lot of blame for the way things are in this world, and the blame is misplaced. And I'm going to try in this video to set the record straight by telling a true story, which is part of every human story. And I am not a Bible scholar. I'm just a regular person who thankfully discovered about 40 years ago how much the creator of the universe and his son Jesus Christ love me. They've known me my whole life, and they were pursuing me to have a relationship with them in spite of the fact that I really didn't want to have anything to do with them, in spite of the fact that I mess up so much in life, especially back then when I first realized, and in spite of the fact that so often I can be selfish and prideful and stubborn. In spite of all of that, they loved me and they wanted a relationship with me, and it's the best decision I've ever made, and I've never looked back. So I come from that perspective. And if you are watching me right now and thinking, that poor delusional person, just one more delusional person with mythical, magical thinking, my pushback to you would be this: that as recently as the 1990s, if you told people back then about all the world events that would take place for 25 years, starting in 2001, and that documents, official documents, would be loaded to the internet and people could read and finally wake up to the fact of how horrific humans can be to other humans, especially children. If you had told people back in the 1990s about this, they would have said to you, that's crazy talk, it'll never happen, that's the unimaginable, that's unthinkable, kind of along the lines of mythical, magical thinking. So I am going to start with the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, and I kind of think of the Bible as God's diary that he instructed humans to write, to scribe for him, so humans could know for all generations how much God loves them, how he has started an eternal plan that was in motion way beyond we could even imagine, that it was a way to instruct humans and teach them and mentor them and comfort them and warn them about evil. It was a way to help humans to understand why he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to earth, with so many wonderful things that God included in his diary to help humans along the way while they live here on this earth. So I kind of think of it that way, and it's worth reading. And I'm going to paraphrase a lot of the passages in Genesis in the first 3 chapters, but I encourage you to read for yourself these passages. So, in the beginning, and this is starting around verse 26, God is talking to his son because his son has been with him from the beginning. And God said, let us make humans in our image. Let us make humans in our likeness, male and female. And then God said to the humans, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And then God said to these 2 humans, I am giving you a gift of dominion. You are going to have dominion over everything. You are going to have dominion over all the creatures of the land and the sea and the birds of the air, over all animals, over all plants, over all food sources, over everything on this earth. You will have dominion. And then God said, for all the food sources that I've given you, there's only one tree that you may not eat from. It is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. For if you eat the fruit from this tree, you will die. And then God looked over everything that he had made, including the humans, and he said, it's very good. It was paradise. It was paradise, and everything was in harmony. This was the world that God intended for humans to live in. This is the world that God intended for humans to thrive and grow in. And I want to underscore a few points from this passage that I just paraphrased. One, being made in God's likeness and image means that we have so many of the characteristics of God, especially free will. We have free will and the ability to choose, either to make good choices or poor choices. Secondly, when God said that He gave humans dominion, the definition of dominion is supreme authority, to rule over everything, having power and control over everything. That's dominion. And then when God said, "You will die if you eat of the fruit from the tree of knowledge," He didn't just mean physical death. He meant the death of so many things if the two first humans disobeyed God. And then I would underscore that in paradise, everything was in harmony. Humans were internally in harmony. There was a peace and an innocence and a purity that humans had within themselves. They were in harmony with one another in their relationship. They were in harmony in their relationship with God. They were in harmony with the animals and the plants and the environment. It was harmonious. It was beautiful. But then in chapter 3 is when everything gets messed up and the world becomes broken and paradise ends and there is no more harmony. And in chapter 3 is when we hear of evil and we are introduced to evil. Let me tell you about the history of evil. Evil is an angelic being. Evil used to be in the heavenly realms as an angelic being, along in the heavenly realms with God and His Son and all the other angelic beings. However, this angelic being had a huge ego and wanted to be like God, wanted to push God out. And he rebelled against God. And for his rebellion, God pushed this angelic being out of the heavenly realm, pushed him down to earth. And this angelic being was so crafty that he was able to influence a third of the other angelic beings in the heavenly realm to follow him to earth. This angelic being has many names. The most common name is Satan. This angelic being takes on many forms and shapes and entities. And I think it's important that in this next passage, God wanted us to know one of the forms and shapes that is very common for evil, for this angelic being to take on. And it's the form of a reptile. In this passage, a serpent. So the serpent was more crafty and subtle than any of the creatures that God had made. So we're getting an idea of the characteristics of evil. And this serpent started talking to the woman. And the serpent said, did God say there is any tree that you can't partake of and eat of its fruit? Now, this is the first act of manipulation by evil towards humans, because the serpent knew exactly what God had said. The serpent was there. He had overheard all the conversations God had with the humans, and he knew the guidelines. And so the woman says, well, yes, God said that we can eat of all the food sources that he made for us and all these trees with all their fruits, but we can't eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. For God said that if we do that, we will surely die. Now, this is the first act of a human listening to evil, being influenced by evil, and choosing to interact with evil. And the serpent said, "You are not gonna die. God just knows that if you eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, eat of its fruit, you're gonna be like God. Your eyes are gonna be open. You're gonna know good and evil. You're gonna know all the things that God knows. And He doesn't want you to know these things. You know, if He really cared about you, He'd want you to know all these things." Now, this is the first act of evil, telling a lie to a human, and a human believing the lie. And this is the first act of evil, gaslighting God, and a human believing the gaslighting, believing what evil said. And so the woman saw how desirous the tree of knowledge of good and evil was, and how desirous the fruit was, and so she took a bite, and she gave a bite to the man that was with her, the other human. And both of their eyes were open, and they were able to know about good and evil. And they were determined to be like God. Now, this is the first act of many things. This is the first act of humans giving in to their selfish desires. This is the first act of humans giving into ego and wanting power and control and to be like God. This is the first act of humans disobeying God. This is the first act of humans following the directive of evil. And this is the first act of a human pulling in another human into their poor choice. And in all these actions, something also terrible happened. And that was that in this act of disobedience, the humans gave over their gift of having dominion to evil. They gave over their ability to have dominion over the earth to evil in this act of disobedience, in this act of following evil's directive. And in essence, it's like they signed a contract, an eternal contract with evil. It was an eternal contract that was eternally irrevocable, eternally non-negotiable, forever binding. And because evil is so crafty and knows how to manipulate, evil put in a couple of extra addendums and terms into the contract that humans were not aware of. And that extra addendum was to have dominion over the earth on evil's terms. And the terms for evil would be to steal, to kill, and destroy. Those were now the new terms. That was the addendum that evil added on to this eternal contract that in essence the first two humans signed over to evil. It's also in essence like Newton's third law of motion. For every action there is a reaction. In that action of disobedience and following the directive of evil, it set off a reaction, an eternal reaction that has been playing out for thousands of years. Thousands of years this reaction has been playing out, and it's still playing out. And it won't stop until the creator of the universe says it will stop. Just like with the contract. The terms of the contract will end when the creator of the universe says it will end in his timing. And so God kind of figures that something's up because these humans are acting a little suspicious. And God says, you know, what's going on? And the man said, well, you know, the woman that you gave me, that you created, well, she made me eat the fruit. And then the woman says to God, well, you know, that charming serpent that you made, well, he tricked me into eating the fruit. So this is the first act of two humans not taking responsibility for their personal choices, blaming somebody else for their personal choice, and blaming God. So this really helps us to get a glimpse of human behavior that we have seen throughout the thousands of years, and we are still seeing now. And God says to them, "What have you done?" There's not anger in this next passage. You just hear the grief and the pain and the anguish. What have you done? Because God knows that the consequences that are now going to happen because they chose to disobey him and listen to the directive of evil, and he now knows that evil has dominion over the earth. He is just grieved because he knows what's going to happen. And he starts to tell the humans what the consequences are going to be. But I want to just highlight the fact that in God's grief, it's kind of like if you are a parent and you have a child that's made a terrible choice, or even if you're someone that has watched a person that you love make a terrible choice and they've already made it and you can't stop it, you can't fix it, all you can do is be with them while they face the consequences of their terrible choice. All you can do is love them while they are facing the consequences of their terrible choice. That's how it was with God. That's how he was feeling. And so God starts to lay out all the consequences that are going to happen moving forward. And he knows that they're going to be in a broken world. And so he starts to tell them that there is going to be relational conflict with one another, relational conflict between humans. There is going to be conflict between humans and God, that humans are going to struggle living on a broken world. They are going to struggle to survive. They are going to struggle to live and provide for themselves. That there is going to be physical physical complications living in a broken world. There is going to be poor health because evil is going to set the terms, has already set the terms now for this earth moving forward. And all of this is in the realm of stealing and killing and destroying. So God knows this. And so he's going over all the consequences moving forward of what it's going to be for these humans. And he also says to evil, if evil tries to somehow push the bounds, the boundary lines of what is already taking place moving forward, that God will sometimes intervene, because God doesn't want evil to destroy his humans. So God will say to evil in this passage, you have some limitations that I'm putting on you. And I also want you to know that I will destroy you. Someday you will be destroyed in my timing. I will destroy you. And not only that, you will never, ever be elevated to the heavenly realms. In fact, I will make sure that you are pushed down to the lowest of low depths of the earth, that you will be in the depths of the earth and never elevated to the heavenly realms. And so this is where we're at, where the world is now broken and there's pain and there's suffering. And you may say, well, isn't God the creator of the universe and he can do everything? I mean, everything's within his power. Yes, it is. Isn't God more powerful than evil, than Satan? Yes, he is. Then why didn't God change things? Well, he couldn't and he wouldn't. And let me tell you why. God doesn't make mistakes. He made humans in his image, in his likeness, and that means that God gave humans free will, the ability to choose both good choices and poor choices. He also made angelic beings to have free will. And if God were to reverse course and to turn back time and to reset the humans' choices, to make them choose something differently than what they had chosen, he would have made them puppets. God did not want humans to be puppets, nor his angelic beings. God had so much love and respect for humans to make humans in his image with the ability to have free will, with the ability to make choices, both good and bad. There was so much love and respect. God didn't want to change that. And so God was saying in these passages, now that you've made these terrible choices, now that you understand moving forward how this world is going to be, how difficult it's going to be, just know that I love you, I still love you, and I will be with you. I will never leave you. I will be with you while you face these consequences. And as we see in the Old Testament, God kept pursuing humans. He did miracle after miracle to show his power, to show his love, to show his forgiveness. He did miracle after miracle to get humans to see how much he loved them and wanted a relationship with him, and to stop worshiping false gods, to stop following the directives of evil, to stop giving in to their selfish desires and ego to want to have power and control and be like God and hurt one another and all of that. And then when it was obvious that humans were still going to choose to worship false gods, to still follow the directives of evil, God said, I'm going to send in my son. I'm going to send in my son to be part deity and part human, because certainly humans would know how much I love them if I sent in my son, who is also human and feels everything that humans feel. Certainly they would see how much I love them, knowing that I feel everything that they feel. Certainly they would know that. And then if I allow my son to die a horrible death, so I can end the death, eternal death and destruction that evil has in that contract for all humanity, if I allow my son to die this death so humans will not be eternally destroyed, will not face eternal death, certainly they would know how much I love them. And as we know today, there's still a lot of people that don't believe in God, or they don't believe that God is a loving and good God. They don't believe that Jesus Christ is his son, who he sent to earth to rescue all humans. So this is the state of the world, and it will end, because when the term of that contract ends, when that reaction stops, what God says in Revelations, I think it's in the chapter 21 of Revelations, when God says, I will make a new heaven and a new earth, it will be paradise again. And this new heaven and earth means that there will be no more pain, no more suffering, no more tears, no more death. So that's what will happen when the reaction that was set in place a long time ago stops. That's what will happen when this eternal contract that evil holds will end. We will get a new heaven and a new earth. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that it helps some people understand that it's really not God's fault. He is not the one to blame. If you want to blame somebody, blame the angelic being evil, Satan, who has dominion over this earth, and his terms are to steal and to kill and to destroy. If you want to blame the first two humans that made a terrible choice and set up all of humanity for all generations to have to face the consequences of their terrible choices. And I think to recognize that humans do make poor choices. We saw a glimpse of the character that humans can live out of. And if humans are living out of the character of making poor choices and not taking responsibility and blaming other people for their poor choices and hurting one another and choosing to live out of selfish desires and ego of demanding to have power and control, all of that, those are all the reasons that this world is the way it is. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. I know it was a long video. Thanks for watching. And I will get back to my series of striving for teleos, which is the Greek word for being fully mature, being brought to completion, fulfilling your purpose. I will get back to that series in the next video. And I just thank you for watching. Bye.